Welcome back to a Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, of course, and I'm joined by Alan Morrison, Celtic by Numbers, the Huddle Breakdown. And I'm also joined by Jim Moore, a man who is known to many as the Oracle. And we're going to be asking these gentlemen about what they're up to these days, as well as what Celtic are up to. I'm going to start with you, Jim Moore. You are a busy, busy man, the busiest man in showbiz. How's the new play going?
I wouldn't call it showbiz. For goodness sake, it's just
you make it showbiz.
Celtic plays, yeah. And if you know the history, so in a couple of months' time at Webster's Theatre, starring Acsom's very own Jerry Taylor, also Matt Costello from Still Games, Stevie the Bookie for Still Games in it as well.
Yeah.
So
Brilliant.
Yeah, so ticket sales okay at the moment, but need to keep pushing. Looking forward to it. Yeah. So that's the main focus. A couple of months' time, and if you know the history, it's all about the period leading up to the takeover, that 6 or 7 happy seasons that we had before Fergus took over. But it's a comedy, so it's you'll laugh, you'll cry some more, you'll cry some more, you'll cry some more, but you'll cry with laughter because I'm told it's very, very funny by the people that's read the script so far. So yeah, looking forward to it. The next Celtic play, yeah. So
and you know that it's a happy ending, Jim. So you can
said that before. It's got a happy ending because what you don't want is like Celts and Seville, brilliant play, but it's not got a happy ending. That's the thing. So you always need a happy ending. Yes.
You just dropped in. You dropped in the name Matt Costello. He could be a new signing target, but no, he's a Scottish actor, and he will be familiar to many of the viewers as the Bookie. Obviously, in a very, very popular TV series, which I believe is no more. The Still Game finished, is it?
No more. Finished.
No more, yeah.
I think it went out on a high, which was good. What you don't want to do is overstay your welcome, because it was on, it went off, it came back, and I think the standard was very, very high. I think Scotland's most popular ever comedy. So, yeah, hey-ho.
Hey-ho, indeed. He also appeared in a great movie called Small Faces, which I loved. Looking After Jojo, you'll remember that. This Year's Love, just alongside Dougray Scott. The Debt Collector with Billy Connolly.
Comfort and Joy.
I've not got that on my list, simply because I've not seen it. Sweet 16, Ken Loach movie with Martin Compton.
I've not seen Comfort and Joy, but the Ice Cream Wars in Glasgow, which was a comedy, before.
I must check
Comfort and
it.
Joy.
We're going to get stick for no talk about Celtic.
I'll shut up now, okay. I'll shut up now.
Bill Patterson.
What's Alan?
I like Bill Patterson and Auf Wiedersehen. But yes, we'll move on to the soccer.
Ali Campbell. Ali Fraser. Sorry, Ali Fraser. That was it.
He has worked with some of the finest actors known to the Scottish scene. Absolutely. Here we go. Alan Morrison. We are going to be talking about Adam Idah, Matt, not Costello, but O'Reilly. We'll be talking Blossom Laval and everything else in the world of Celtic. I'm going to come to you first, Alan, because you come on the show once a month. So sometimes it's good to take a perspective from someone who isn't in the trenches every single day with us and becoming so frustrated. And I'm not saying you're not involved, but you're kind of looking at it from a different perspective, aren't you, when it comes to the transfers?
Yeah, well, I think I benefit from that, and also geographically and culturally, I suppose, because I live in England and Sheffield. I'm not in the weeds of the sort of the Glasgow rivalry, what Celtic supporters are feeling on the ground necessarily, which can be a bad thing, can be a good thing in terms of perspective. But in terms of before we get into that, I just on building on what Jim said, if you don't mind me going off at a tangent, I think Celtic supporters, and well, I'm talking about myself now, I'm not talking about Celtic, but I think maybe some of us, and certainly I do, maybe take for granted the absolute wealth of talent and creativity amongst the Celtic support, exemplified by Mr. Orr putting on his plays. You mentioned Jerry Taylor, who's putting on his own shows, Kevin with his poetry, yourself, Paul, with the shows that you put on, bringing Celtic people together. I once asked David, that runs the Celtic News Now site, how many Celtic sites are there out there? And he said, well, there's 420 registered, but maybe about 100 and 150 active on a day-to-day sort of basis. That is an enormous groundswell of creativity and effort that Celtic supporters put into supporting their club, having a voice, being creative, like Jim, like yourself, joining things like music, art, poetry in Graham's case, joining all these things together to celebrate Celtic. I don't know if there's any other club in the world that has that. Maybe there is, and I'm sure I'll be corrected in the comments. But I just wanted to say, I was just reflecting on that as Jim was speaking, and probably took it for granted a little bit. So I just wanted to call that out.
No, I think you're right, Alan. You're right, because I remember having the same discussion with Celtic when my first book was being published, and I was talking about the incredible canon of literature. The amount of books that are out there, and
Sure.
in all shapes and sizes. And I think that their view on it was that Man United was up there, but there's no many other clubs at that kind of level when it came to the amount of books and the amount of literature out there. Yeah, and it is, going back to Jim's very point, it's about the history, isn't it? Jim, very, very quickly, did you consider calling it Bend It Like the Bonnet?
Yeah, yeah, I did. That was the kind of working title for it. But I think Fergus divides opinions a wee bit, and I've tried to be quite balanced. And also what I didn't want to do is have to keep saying it's not about Fergus McCann, because it's not about Fergus McCann. It's about a Celtic family in those 7 years leading up to the takeover, and how they see things. It's 3 generations. There's a kind of 40-ish-year-old woman, her dad, and their young son. So you've got three different viewpoints. The older guy's pretty much behind the Kellys and the Whites, and the younger guy's he's buying Note the View and wants to get involved in supporters campaigns, and the mum's the mum. But so she can see both sides of it. So I've tried to be balanced. And Fergus appears in one scene, kind of off stage. So if I called it that, people would be saying, "Oh, it's a play about Fergus McCann," and it's not. I need to emphasise a play about Fergus McCann. It's a play about Celtic in those years, and that's the thing about. I mean, people could talk about the Celtic DAs quite a lot, and I think the 3 of us would qualify as a Celtic DA. So if you want to know what it was like to be a Celtic DA, and if you know the history, that's the play for you, because it is viewed from the people's point at that time, and how difficult it was. And the point I make, to people these days is that, we went through 9 years of absolute misery, and then nowadays, if we're drawing nothing each with Ross County at half time, they get booed off the park. It's madness. It's utter madness. And like Alan was saying, sometimes you need to take a wee step back and not go absolutely mental, because as of last weekend, the madness is back. We're back to the competitive stuff, and we'll be analysing the minutiae, and that's what Alan and the guys do brilliantly on his Celtic by numbers and the huddle, just kind of tremendous levels of detail. So we're all into that now, and then anything the manager says, we'll be thinking, did he mean to say that? Why did he say it? So it's a mental obsession that we have, and anyone tuning in the chat room at 12:30 on a Friday, you've got the obsession as well, obviously.
We're all obsessed.
We're all obsessed. Yeah, all obsessed.
Jim, absolutely. Yeah. And by the way, the big thing I always point out, talking about the dark old days, and earning your spurs as a Celtic DA, as you quite rightly pointed out, Jim, is how much fun we had going to the games. I mean, it was dismal with regards to the outlook and the stadium and the board, but I just think there was a humour there, Alan. There was a humour whereby, self-deprecating, we could laugh at Celtic because we were allowed. It's a wee bit like a family thing. You can criticise members of your family. Anybody else does it, we're not having that. But, and going on the bus and, the singing and the songs, the creativity, the fanzines, always look on the bright side, whilst it's teaming down at Tynecastle and we're getting beat 3-1. I still enjoyed it. I enjoy the success more, Alan, but I still enjoyed going to these games.
Yeah, so I'll be honest, right? That period, really the 90s, I would say, was when I was most disconnected from Celtic. Not by choice, and it just so happens that was the sort of fallow period, if you like. It was just through geography and circumstance. That's, I'd moved to England by that stage. Was getting married, first house, all that sort of thing. Early 90s, lived in England. There was very difficult to consume any Celtic material. They weren't on the TV very often in terms of watching the matches. I didn't live in it. I didn't live anywhere near. I didn't really know any other Celtic supporters. And then also during that period, I was living in the States for a while, and I would literally know the result by buying a newspaper 2 or 3 days later, sort of thing. So that's a period which I kind of passed me by a little bit in terms of, I was almost completely disconnected. It was only really with Sky TV coming on in the late 90s, and then I was able to get more, I was able to get more input into into Celtic at that time, because the internet really only started. Remember started using it in about like 1997 or something like that. So it was only really then in the latter part of the. And I do remember going to a friend's house in the States to watch, Harold Brackback and Larsson score against St Johnstone, etc. I do remember that, but it was a period where you had to really fight and scrape to find anything, to connect you with the club. So, and I always remember that. And again, it's one of the reasons I'd do Celtic by numbers in the huddle breakdown, because I am geographically isolated, but I want to be connected to the club and to other supporters. So it's a reason for doing it, really. And in this digital age, it's now possible to do that in a real, very real way.
The best.
Also, we're fortunate there wasn't social media back in the day, because these banter years of the last 10, 12 years or so, that would have been what it was like in reverse, basically. So that's mitigate. And I think it's an expectation thing. I mean, Paul talked about, being happy going to the games because he didn't expect to win. So you were at that kind of level, whereas now we expect to win, and that's why you get booed off the park against Ross County when it's 0-0 at half time. It was an expectation thing. But because it had a happy ending when we eventually stopped at 10, if we hadn't stopped at 10 and it was still rolling on, you wouldn't be looking back. In fact, you wouldn't have this podcast if things kept rolling on, if things didn't change at that point in time. But anyway, there's been a bit of all our yesterdays today, so maybe we should move on to.
One final wee story about that stopping the 10 or winning the 1, as some people like to call it. We were in Belfast. John Hughes was there, but Gilgy was there. We were in Belfast in January. Paddy Lavery, who's in the comment section, was also there. And this guy came up to us, and I was with Jackie McNamara and Simon Donnelly, who played in the game. And he told us where he watched the game. So Alan watched the game in the States. Jim, you were in the stadium, I believe.
Yeah.
This guy was in jail. This guy was doing a life sentence, and he told Jackie and Simon and myself that he never won more tobacco than he did that day, and it was a great memory. So if you're watching as a free man, I hope you're enjoying the show. Let's go to some of the comments. There is, of course, news breaking today also around Callum McGregor retiring from international football. David Boyle brings it up. When you look at Callum McGregor and James Forrest, it's something I was looking at last week, Alan, not quite as in-depth details as you look at when it comes to data, but just really basic stuff, the appearances of Callum McGregor versus James Forrest. So James Forrest is 6 away from 500. Callum is 465 appearances, but he's 2 years younger. So he's crammed almost the same amount of football into 2 years. Although he did play at Notts County, I get it. I think looking at the fact that he plays so much football, and he has done for a number of years, and he has had a few niggles recently, and in terms of his speed, it's regressing that wee bit. Does it feel like now is the time for him to retire? It feels like the right time, Alan.
I think it's a smart decision, a bit like the Joe Hart retirement decision. I think it's a really smart decision. So the huddle breakdown actually started mainly because of the obvious decline in Scott Brown's performance with age that a lot of people in the support didn't want to hear. And it was kind of James badgering me about that. Not badgering, that's not fair, but he making this point and us discussing it that kicked off the huddle breakdown. And we've been sort of talking in the background about, they don't want to hear about the Callum McGregor situation. You know what I mean? Because there's clear evidence again in the data that Callum McGregor's performances are dropping off. Now, you might think of that, and I think that sounds terrible, etc. And people take a kind of binary view on that. I was kind of okay when he signed that long-term contract, because the view I settled on was, yes, he is declining relative to his previous performances, but if you take Callum McGregor as he is today and benchmark his performances as they are today as a 32-year-old, and you went out into the market to try and buy a player with those attributes, you'd be spending a tremendous amount of money. So even though he is regressing, he's regressing from a high plateau in terms of his relative worth to the team, and he still has that worth to the team, but we have to recognise that he is regressing. And therefore, this is a great step, because it just removes a number of weeks of football, of intense football from his, and travel as well, importantly, from his calendar. I think the Nations League has probably introduced even more football into the mix. So that's good, I think, from his perspective and for Celtic's perspective. And we do need to actually work on the succession plan, as Henrik McLarson says in the comments there. We do need to work on that succession plan, and that's what I want to see in terms of a mature, organised football club. Is how are we preparing for the day that McGregor moves from being starting every game to starting not every game to starting maybe occasionally, because he's 32 and his numbers are going down. And I know nobody wants to hear that, but it's just the way it is.
And the thing is, two points to make there, Alan, is you're studying the data. The club will be aware of the data. But if you were to look at the squad, who do you think is the most suited candidate, if we have one, to step into the boots? Which player is most suitable, do you think, most similar to Callum McGregor?
Well, I'm not avoiding the question, but it really depends what you want out of that role. I mean, I would argue that Callum McGregor is quite unique in being the type of number 6 who I'd classify him as a tempo setter. So he's not like a Makalele 6. He's not like a putter out of fires, a stopper of danger. He's not that type of 6. He's not that classic holding midfield player that will just patrol a zone in front of the defence and just be positionally sound, get the ball, give it simple. Those aren't his strengths. He's a tempo setter. He sets the passing tempo for the rest of the team. That's really important in terms of, especially breaking down low blocks where you've got to play with a certain intensity. And he's like the conductor, if you like, to simplify it. So is there anyone else that can play that role? Not obvious to me, but also the question would be, moving forward, do you actually replace him with like for like, or do you replace him with a different kind of pivot, in there? Because the only player that I can think of that is, even remotely like him would probably be Billy Gilmour. But he's at Brighton. I think Brighton are trying to get rid of him. He's on like 37 grand a week, so I think so. He's not going to come to Celtic. But what I'm saying is, it would be difficult to find an exact replica of McGregor. I'm not sure that's necessarily the best answer. That's down to the manager and the way he wants the team to play. So we may have to think about, what do we want that pivot role to be like? How does the team best function around him? Because we've seen in Europe that midfield with McGregor as the pivot, even with the talent of Hatate and O'Reilly with him, is defensively just not really that sound enough for playing the top teams in Europe. So it's probably a chance to reset and think about what that future of that role looks like.
I mean, in terms of midfield players, then we've obviously brought in Bernardo earlier this week, Jim, and we were up at the press conference. We've been sharing some of that on the socials. Bernardo says that there was only one club. He was focused on coming back to Celtic. His agent certainly didn't tell him about interest elsewhere. And then obviously it was a case of the club thrashing out a deal, which thankfully they did. I wanted Bernardo back. I think that he showed enough in his first year as a Celtic player to suggest that he is able to stamp his authority on this team at some stage, whether that be after the departure of a certain midfield player, I'm not sure. But I was happy with the business of bringing him in. But right on the back of that, Jim, we hear that another midfield player who appeared during appeared during the pre-season was Boss and Lowell. And there was a lot of kind of positivity around him coming back from a good season at Fleetwood. But it seems as though he's on his way to Stoke for $3 million. So what's your take on the midfielders, McGregor, Lawal, and of course Bernardo, who's just in the door, before we get to the other Matt O'Reilly?
I realised Callum Mack had stopped international football, so that's a bit of a surprise.
It was just earlier this afternoon, Jim. It wasn't that long ago, maybe an hour ago.
Because when you first said it, the first thing I thought of there was your Joe Ledley night the other week when Joe talked about, and he was brilliant, he was unbelievably good, Joe Ledley, fantastic listen, about the fact that in his mid-20s he was thinking of chucking the Wales team, and it was Lenny that talked him out of it. And eternally thankful to Lenny, because then Wales went on and they qualified for the Euros and almost got to the final and all that stuff. And I wonder whether he's a bit scunnered, Callum McGregor, of what happened at the summer there. That that are we going to get much better, and maybe it's time to just move along and let these younger players come in. Good news for Celtic, as Alan said, less games, less travel, less stress, less everything. So good from a Celtic point of view. The Lawal thing, I've never seen him, so I couldn't really judge. If the manager wants to sell him, we need to have faith in the manager. He knows what to do. I think Is he not that kind of player that Alan just described there? That kind of guy that sits in front of the back four and stops things happening. And I think for Europe, maybe we need that kind of player.
More box. Sorry, Jim. More box to box, I would say.
Is he? Well. So, yeah, I mean, I haven't seen him, and there seemed to be lots of good reports at the end of last season, albeit it was Fleetwood he played for. So you thought maybe he may get his chances. But if the manager wants to sell him, you have to have trust in the manager, because I think at this point in time, without going off too much of a tangent, I think the manager must be livid about what's happening just now with this lack of signings. This time last year, I was kind of nonplussed about the new manager coming in. I thought it was a bit, lacked imagination, but always recognised as a good manager, and he was a guy I think that won us the league last year, because we're pretty poor up to the end of March. I think he got us over the line. So I'm now more of a supporter of the manager, and I just look at what's been happening in the past couple of months, and I kind of despair of what he's having to go through, because he's there to coach the team, to manage the team. He's getting pulled into be fine player, Brendan, on you go. So anyway, but Matt O'Reilly will go. He'll definitely go. I think it's the best time for him to go. Personally, it's the best time for the club to sell him. So I don't see anything that's going to stop that happening. Bernardo physically looks a bit like him, with my bad eyesight at the games. You always think, who's that? Is that O'Reilly? Is that Bernardo?
He needs to pull his socks up, literally. Yeah,
that's the only thing you can tell different, apart from ability, obviously. But did he not play in all the Champions League games last year, Bernardo? Or most of them. So again, the manager must trust him in Europe as well. Major contribution to the goal in the cup final and what have you. So it'd be good to see him have a run in the team. And is he the replacement for O'Reilly? Maybe, the way things are going. But the Law thing, haven't seen the guy, don't know much about him. If the manager thinks he's not in his plans and they get a couple of million for him, fine. Maybe it'd have been a better idea to stick him to see if any Scottish clubs fancied him, in Aberdeen or a Hibs or a Hearts or somebody. Maybe you could see what he's like in the environment, I think, because you've said that before yourself, Paul. It's like, it'd be good to get some of these guys out on loan where we can see them on a week-to-week basis, because this is the league they're playing in. I know we want better quality for Europe, but first and foremost, we need to win the league. And could Bosun Law cut it in the SPFL? Well, if he went to Hearts or Hibs and showed every week that he was good enough to do that, then we give him a chance. But a long-winded answer to say it. The manager knows best, and we put our trust in Brendan.
I'm going to go back. There's some great points here, Jim, and this is what I love about a Celtic state of mind, and that the contributors and also the comments that come through can actually fashion your own view on things, because you do sometimes have a view, and then you hear other contributions to that, and you can even change your mind, and that's what it's all about, and it's healthy. And I remember that right back in the days that Jim mentioned at the top of the show, travelling on supporters buses, it was an absolute education. And as a young person, you would sit and just listen. And then as you got a wee bit older and a wee bit more confident, then you would contribute to the conversations. And, you would never agree with everybody, but the point of views were taken on board, and they could definitely build your own view. And I think the Boston Lava one, I was saying before we came on here, Jim, to Alan, my view has gone full circle on him, because it's been a bit manic. At first, he was on my list. Every pre-season, I have a list of the guys that I think should leave the football club either permanently or on loan. And he was on the on-loan list alongside the likes of Odin Holm. I think Yang was on there as well. Rocco Vata, there's the Clarkson, just to get him in. And so I was thinking, put him out on loan, and it was that type of deal I was thinking about, Jim. In the environment of Scottish football, go and do a job for Aberdeen like Scales did, go and do a job for Hibs or Kilmarnock or St Mirren. But it would appear that there's been during this pre-season, Jerry Taylor, very own Jerry Taylor, asked Brendan the question after the Ayr United game. And I thought Boston Lava looked very good in that game, albeit against championship opposition. And he was non-committal, Brendan Rodgers. So we've got that up on the YouTube channel. He's very non-committal about the future of Boston Lava. We then go to America, and I was saying to you earlier, Alan, I didn't think he stepped up to the plate over in the States in the games that he played. He looked a wee bit out of his depth, in my view. And then, you come back, and apparently Stoke want to pay around £3 million for him. If he's not in the boss's plans, and the gaffers walked into this development of a player, which he's not really played a part in until last season, or not even then, because he was out at Fleetwood, then it would be easier for him to say, right, just move him on. He's maybe not as invested because he didn't identify him, bring him to the football club. And from the business perspective, you bring a guy in for 150 grand for Watford, and a few years later sell him for £3 million, who's not getting a game. I can see the balance there. What's your view on it? Did you think he had the potential to step up, Alan?
So, again, like Jim, hardly seen the kid. Obviously got no data as far as Celtic context is concerned. I was really, at the beginning of the summer, really encouraged and hopeful that he would actually break through and become a member of the first team squad, because his loan at Fleetwood had been very successful. His numbers were great. His performances were great. I think he won a number of awards there as well. It was just a successful loan, very much like the at Notts County. You might scoff at English League 1 and 2 football, but it is tough. It's tough. It's 46 games and it's physical and it's fast. A bit like Scottish football is not as easy as people think. May not be the most technically gifted league, but the commitment, the and all that side of the game is there and present and correct. And it's just an absolute mental and physical grind in terms of the volume of games that you have to play. So that was a great audition, I thought. And like you say, he did feature in the early pre-season games, and I thought looked okay. But what was really the most telling was that he was picked out with Odin Holm actually by the manager and publicly. Quite. Brendan's a really smart guy, right? And he picks his words very carefully. And for him to sort of criticise Holm and Lowell for needing to work harder off the ball was very, very telling. And obviously, if it's the fact that he's being let go, as the rumours seem to be, then obviously he's not done enough. I remember he said exactly the same thing about Rio Hatate at the beginning of last season. And then Hatate got injured, etc., etc. But so I guess from Rodgers' perspective, it's how does the player respond to those comments back on the training field, and maybe with Holm, he's responded positively. He came on at the weekend. In fact, he came on ahead of Bernardo, and he's in the squad sort of thing. And Lowell's now looking like he's out the door. So maybe it's it's not an ability thing. Maybe it's an attitude thing. All young players have got areas to develop. If Rodgers doesn't feel he's got the capacity or the willingness to develop, and I'm not saying it's one or the other, or whether it's both or whatever, I don't know. Then this is the sort of ruthless side of Rodgers, because as much as we're all sitting here impatiently twiddling our thumbs waiting for signings, there's an awful lot of players we need to get out the door. So we need to do this housekeeping to free up the wages to make the space in the squad. And if Rodgers has decided Lowell's not up to it, then we need, like you say, take the money and move on.
Yeah, there's some great comments coming in the comment section. Well over 1,100 watching the stream live, which is sensational. Thanks everybody for getting involved. Here's a very interesting one, and I'm going to ask you directly about this one. Hoopy67. So, Alan, before I come on to Jim, do you think the board see Bernardo as O'Reilly's replacement? I've heard a lot of people asking that question on the socials.
I just see so many comments around the board. Like, I don't know what people think the board do. They certainly don't. I'm pretty sure they certainly don't take Brendan aside and next to the coffee machine and go, do you see that Bernardo? I think he should replace O'Reilly. I mean,
because he looks like him.
I know, and actually, I'm glad you said that.
Nobody will notice if we do it really quickly. Nobody will notice.
Is that why Matt O'Reilly's permed his hair? He's definitely got a wee perm in there. I noticed that at the weekend.
When I do my data collection, obviously I pretty much know all the Celtic players because of their gait, the way they move, etc.
Yeah.
But Bernardo and O'Reilly continue to confound me. They look so similar. Anyway, so listen. So I just wanted to get the wider point about the board thing is, again, the board will give the football department a budget, right? Mm-hmm. Brendan will have a budget, and the recruitment team will have a budget. And that's their job done at that point. Other than monitoring on a monthly, quarterly basis that are we on track, are we on budget, and then Mackay and Nicholson and what have you, the club's legal team, finalising the contracts. The actual decision about what players to get, where to get them from, what they're worth, how much they're worth to the team, etc. That's all down to Rodgers and his team working within a budget. It's not the board that are picking these players. It's absolute fallacy, right? Now, we can talk about the board in the wider sense, and I know that wasn't how you set up the question, so I won't go down that rabbit hole, and I've got plenty of opinions on that if you want, but let's just, the board does not tell Brendan Rodgers whether Bernardo plays instead of O'Reilly, or that this player from Liverpool in the reserves should be brought in on loan. They just don't, right? So anyway. Is Bernardo the replacement for O'Reilly? I would say no. I would say they're very different players. If O'Reilly leaves, which and by the way, that's not cut and dried, right? O'Reilly's a very smart kid, and he's also looks after himself. He seems to be well advised. He manages his career based on many factors, not just money. So we saw that he could have stayed at Fulham on a big wad of money, and he dropped down a couple of divisions to MK Dons. And that earned him his move to Celtic, right? So he's a bright lad. He manages his career well. If he doesn't think Brighton's the club for him at this stage in his career, he's 23. Then he won't go to Brighton, right? Even if Celtic could, accept the offer. He's happy. He seems to be happy at Celtic. I don't think it'd be a disaster for him to stay at Celtic. I'm not saying he will. I'm just questioning whether it is Brighton the team that he wants to go to. So it's not cut and dried that he'll leave. The little sort of bits of snippets I've had is that he would prefer actually, Spain or Italy anyway over England. So I think there's a lot to go on this one, and sadly for us, it will probably go down to the wire as far as the transfer window is concerned. Back to the question: does Bernardo replace him? Like I say, with O'Reilly leaving, it'll leave a massive creative deficit, which Bernardo has shown no sign of being able to fill. I think he's got a goal threat in him, Bernardo. I think he's defensively very good. I think he's a good all-round kind of grafter in midfield. He's got, as I say, with a goal threat. But the one aspect of his game that was lacking almost to the margins last season was his creative game. And that's the piece that you would need to develop, really. Is he going to be a valuable member of the squad? I'm sure he is, but I wouldn't see him as a direct replacement for O'Reilly. I think if and when O'Reilly leaves, I think we'll see a more I don't mean a sort of out and out number 10, but we'll see a player who's more of a 10 than the 8 that I see Bernardo as. So I think we'll have to replace him, to replace that creativity is what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. When you even just, as I say, base level data, looking at the goal contributions, the assists, all this kind of stuff, that's going to be hard to replace. Paddy Lavery, welcome back to the show. Afternoon all, says Paddy. There he is with Lawrence Connolly there in the avatar, and Jungle Lion immediately comes in and says, get him banned. And I blame Double Denim for that. Double Denim's in the chat as well. Afternoon, folks. You're looking very happy. Happy Friday. Nice and positive. Hope everyone's well and looking forward to the weekend. Be nice to have some signings to discuss, but there are a few talking points today. Hopefully, well, there definitely is. And Ian Roy comes in to say, hail, snitch. Hope you're well today. Keep waking up here in Florida, expecting a signing. Disappointed once again. Will that signing, Jim, be Adam Idah? And I'm going to bring in another one from Paul. Lowell going for 2 to 3 shows how small a fee 6 to 8 is for Idah. I don't mind that comparison, because 2 months ago, I asked the question of JP Mason on this very show, should we go to 8? And we both agreed. And then I spoke to the man who deals with the money, and that's Jim Moore. And I asked you the question, Jim, and you said, yes, we go to 8. 2 months later, there is talk that Norwich want 8, and Celtic are going to go in and up their initial bid of 4.5. Let's just get it done, Jim. Are we still at that same stage? Get it done.
Just to qualify me saying go for 8, I think at the time we thought the number is 6, and that was a number that was getting quoted quite a lot.
Yeah.
And then I suppose the question was, given we have got hundreds of cash sitting in the bank, could we push the boat out a wee bit to 7? And I said, yeah, we could. Could we push it to 8? Yeah, we could. But at what point do you say that's the top line? They go no further than that, because if 8.5 would get them, and we don't get them, and we don't get somebody who contributes as much as he contributed last year, the fans will go mad. So it's difficult, to pluck numbers out the air. It's dragged on too long. I think most supporters felt as if, apart from like for like signings, goalkeeper out, goalkeeper in, Bernardo out, Bernardo in, Idah out, Idah in, you're looking for 3 quality players to walk into the first team to give us a chance in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
The domestic scene should take care of itself, although I'm not as confident as lots of other people were after last weekend, but know that we can talk about that as well. But I think we need quality in the team, and that's why I think the manager would be frustrated. I said about a month ago, the lack of signings, I wasn't that concerned because we had a whole month to go before the first league game of the season. But if we haven't done much before the first league game of the season, to me, that's a bit of a red flag, because In an ideal world, if you're the manager, you don't care how much somebody costs. You want them in as soon as possible. And if I was a manager, I'd want these guys in at the start of pre-season training so you can assimilate them with the club. You go abroad, bonding with the players. That's not happened. So if I'm the manager, I'm pretty annoyed at that I couldn't get that opportunity. And we've only got, was it 3 weeks to go to the window, slammed shut. And at this point in time, we're not that confident of getting Idah, never mind 3 more players. But I think given the money that we've got, do I think Idah's an £8 million player? No. I think he's maybe a £5 or £6 million player in my head. And I think we could and should push the boat out, because I said a couple of times before, no Idah, no double last year. He was, I mean, obviously everyone contributed last year, but he was a catalyst, last minute goals, cup final goal. Without him, I don't think we won the league last year. He's shown that he can step up in the big games that count. Ibrox, Hampden in a cup final, last minute penalty kicks. So we know what we're getting. He's an international player. And if it wasn't Adam Idah, if it was somebody else who we looked at who had a similar performance levels, international player, given his age, given the contribution they made to, obviously not one of the top 4 or 5 leagues, but a decently competitive league, goes in there, makes a huge difference. But be looking at him thinking, well, maybe he is worth £6, £7, £8 million. So yes, the kind of long-winded answer was to say, I think we should go to £8 million, given that, I mean, we shouldn't be chucking about money just because we have hundreds of money. We should be sensible with that. But what concerns me is, and I would go higher in terms of the club, in terms of responsibility. I know Alan said the board, well, you can't bring the board into this, but my frustration, and we had this chat, I think, last time or the time before that, about having the right people doing the right jobs.
Yeah.
I think Alan's alluded to in the past that whole parts of the club are second class. They're not first class. They're not best in class, whatever the phrase you want to use. We don't have that. And then we talked about, who was it at the time? Dudgeon. Wally Collum was another one that we talked about. The fact that have you scoured the world and you've came up with Wally Collum. So when Don Mackay left under kind of really strange circumstances that we think was maybe he was ruffling too many feathers, what's the person specification you go for the new chief executive? Well, number one, you would think has been a chief executive of a reasonably sized company, or what Don Mackay was basically. He was running an organisation, a large sporting organisation in the country, and had experience. So there's number one for me, person spec, being a chief executive. And I mean, no ill will to the guy who's the current chief executive, because by all accounts, he's a good guy. But he's never been a chief executive. So you bring him in, and then things start happening, and we don't bring in a head of recruitment. Does that not start with that chief executive then? Is he not the guy who should be doing this? But then you say, actually, go hire. Who appointed him? Who thought that was a good idea? Because that's going to have impact further down that chain. And we're left with a manager who is meant to coach the team, to manage the team. So when he finishes his stint on the training field, one assumes he's going back, he's analysing the next game, who we're playing. He's looking at Boston Lowell's stats. He's doing that stuff. And somebody says, whoa, come here, help us. Help us find players. And he's like, that's not my job. My job's to do this. But hold on, you need to help us because we've been incompetent. We couldn't do this, so you need to help us. That to me is madness, and that starts at the top. And when you make mistakes at the top, it filters all the way down. It's just, I mean, so what happens if the chef leaves? You're going to build Brendan, and Brendan, you need to cook your meals for the players, Brendan. How do you want your steak? Medium? Do you want vegetables with that? Is that what happens?
Do they still have a pre-match steak?
Well, I think they have something at Lennoxton each day, So Brendan, you get the whites on, and you go in there, mate, and and make sure you
isn't that James McCarthy's job? No, he's away. It must be Liam Shaw's.
So that, I mean, that's maybe not the best example there, but that's how mad it is. It's like saying you're doing a job that's not really actually your job. You're doing somebody else's job when we need you to do this job.
Yep.
I just think, what was the question?
Listen,
$8 million, go for it.
Right. But what you've said there, I find quite interesting, because the dysfunctional nature, Alan, of the recruitment has been, I think, laid bare. And it's been laid bare, not just in this window, but if you go back to last season with the recruitment coming in, Brendan clearly was going to be asked the question at his first presser, and he was. And he spoke about how different it was from his first time at Celtic Park to what it is now. He spoke to Callum McGregor about it. Then he's presented with a group of players that he doesn't rate. I mean, listen, it's no a sensational headline to state that. He didn't play them, Alan. He didn't rate the guys that they had gone out and spent 21 million quid on. So we fast forward a year, and the head of recruitment, the head of scouting are no more, but they've not been replaced. So I get what Jim's saying. Whose responsibility is it to have that functioning recruitment team? Because if you don't have that, deals are going to slow down to a degree, because the whole focus of Brendan has to be on preparing the team rather than getting the steak ready in the kitchen. So I think that's something I would throw at boardroom level, because they've not got their finger out. And it really is quite complacent for a club Celtic size, isn't it, Alan?
Yeah, listen, you're preaching to the choir in terms of concerns over recruitment and scouting. So that's all part of football operations. Who should be the C-level, who essentially sets the strategy and makes sure that football operations are functioning to be the best they can be? That should be a director of football, who I believe should be reporting into the board as the head of football operations. We don't have that, and we don't have the recruitment and the scouting, underneath that. Obviously, in terms of who's leading that, and are they of sufficient seniority? Do they have sufficient authority to execute their roles? Let's be very clear, right? Lowell Ball is dead, right? I'll brook no argument on that. But we've moved from one awful model to another awful model, and that awful model is management, right? Which is again an archaic, out of date, costly model. Now I'm kind of okay with it in the very short term, in the sense that every manager Celtic have had, nearly, if you want to look back, comes into the club with a wee list on the back of a fag packet of players that they want, irrespective of what the internal scouting and recruitment team have been doing, and they usually get them. Strachan got Boric and Nakamura and Zarafsky. Lennon got Hooper and Ledley and so forth, and Rodgers brought in Toure and Sinclair. So every manager comes in and they have a few players that they want to bring in. Rodgers never got that last season, so this is his time to get his list. And the reason that we're playing manager as God is because of the lack of a functional, modern recruitment and scouting department at the club at the moment. And the downside to this, and coming back to Adam Idah, is it appears we are operating almost solely and completely in the English market, which is extremely costly, and it's just a very difficult market to deal in for a club with the finances of Celtic. So we end up potentially paying 8 million for Norwich's second or third choice striker. Which is, I think, a ridiculous situation to be in, frankly. I don't blame Rodgers. That's the market he knows, and he's having to lead it, as you say, in lieu of anyone else actually, setting strategy and saying, this is how the recruitment functions. You tell us what you want, we'll do the magic. We'll come back with a list and we'll agree who we sign. That's just basics. That's how most modern football clubs around Europe operate, and Celtic don't seem to do that. So the reason I'm kind of okay with it in the short term is because I suspect when Rodgers gets to have his list, it will probably be a decent list. But beyond this transfer window, if we don't get this fixed, we're in a hell of a lot of trouble, because the manager of God model essentially means we bring in all the players the manager wants, and then when the manager inevitably leaves, you're stuck with these players that may not want to be there anymore, and the next manager wants to bring in his players. It's just not a sustainable model. So that's my frustration with it. The board are complicit in this, in the respect of not having the structures in place, not enforcing a strategy over football operations. I think to balance that, we've got an exceptionally good commercial operation, etc. So the board runs the club very effectively on that basis, runs it very poorly at the core business, which is the football operations, and we're seeing that at the moment. And we're now going to be paying over the odds for English reserve players.
You're right, because it's the only market Brendan knows, and that isn't a slight on him. You look at the goalkeeper, Sinisalo, comes from Aston Villa. Kasper Schmeichel wasn't playing in English football when we signed him, but he was known by Brendan Rodgers for his time at Leicester. You then look at, obviously, Adam Idah, Norwich, and Bernardo, we had him in the door last season. The difference, I think, with Ange, he had his knowledge of the Japanese market for obvious reasons. He had his knowledge of guys like Aaron Moy. He was working very closely with Frank Trimboli at CAA Base, who had the contacts and the network for players outside of that region. So you're spot on there, and we need to have that. Like you say, we might get through, and it slows everything down. We might get through this transfer window unscathed, in inverted commas, but it's not going to happen quickly. But from now on, it needs to be sorted out. And I'm going to come to Jim to talk about Kilmarnock. We're going to talk about Hibs. But before we do that, Alan was talking about commercial. And I felt this was quite interesting because as an Acsom team, we were talking about sponsors on the jerseys. Everybody knows I'm a jersey pervert. I put it out there myself. You don't have to tell me.
Okay.
A jersey pervert, yes. And I would rather we didn't have a sponsor on our jerseys. And I think since 2003, we have either been sponsored by an alcohol or a betting firm. And I put it out there. I said, listen, what do we get a year for sponsorship? Is it about £2 million for the jersey sponsor? Would you rather have no sponsor or the foundation on there if the jersey sponsor ended up as a stadium sponsor? And I thought everybody would say, oh, aye, because, I mean, let's be honest, Jim, unless it's something that you take the mickey out of, like the spaghetti had, no one cares who the sponsor is of a football stadium. You still call it, I still call Arsenal Stadium Highbury. They don't even play there anymore. You still call it Celtic Park or Paradise or Parkhead. You wouldn't care what the, to a degree, what the sponsor's name was. You wouldn't call the stadium that. Would you do that, Jim? Would you put the foundation on the jerseys or keep them on sponsor list for that?
I call Arsenal doing Highbury as well. That's what Celtic does. That's what we do. We don't change. That's it. Alan's right. I mean, I get at least 2 or 3 emails a day from Celtic tell me about different types of merch or the women's game or win a signed shirt or whatever. So they're exceptionally good at that. But the tagline is always a club like no other. Shows what that means. Give us an example of what that means. Because I don't think they're particularly good at gauging supporters' feelings in general, not specific, in general terms. So, give up a couple of million quid because we don't want e-betting. We will take, I was going to say, we'll take a stand. We accept the fact that it's not a good look to have an alcohol company on our jersey. We're not going to have that. It costs a couple of million quid, but you know what? We're a club like no other. That's what we do. We've got the Champions League coming up. And, well, in fact, before that, we're playing Hibs in the League Cup. And in seasons gone by, a League Cup game, if it was at home, that's on the season ticket.
Yep.
It's not on the season ticket. £25 to go and see Hibs in the League Cup. Why is it £25? Why is it not a tenner? Why is it not on the season ticket book? Right. So if you're a club like no other, that's what you do. With the Champions League one coming up, I think the word in the street is it's going to be 50 quid a game, £200. Why don't they turn in and say, we're not going to do that, we'll charge you £100 a game? But you know why? Because we're a club like no other, we'll charge you 25 quid a game. Because that's who we are. We're a club like no other. I'd like to see them do things like that. And I don't mind them then saying, we're a club like no other. I don't see us being a club like no other. I don't see examples. Unless you go back to the Lisbon Lions, unless you go back to how the club was formed, I don't see examples of the club saying, here's why we're a club like no other. Let's have no sponsors in the jerseys. Or there must be loads of companies out there, maybe not so much in Scotland, obviously, for obvious reasons, because you can't sponsor one without the other, but big international companies who are not bothered about our little goldfish bowl, whether they're in Germany or Italy or China or Japan, get out and ask them for their money, and the fact that, there are more and more, the fact that we've got more and more Japanese players, we must be pretty big out there as well. And we're like a multicultural team. So who have we got playing in whatever areas? Going, Nicholas Kuhnstein from Germany. Who can we get? German sponsors or whatever. So my kind of call is actually do something that you can say, club like no other. That's us, because as fans, that's what we want. You want to say, look at our club, look how good we are. Because the thing we have, and it's unfortunate, but it is what it is we need to be in a more competitive league. This league is not competitive. Obviously, we've one main rival, And I mean no disrespect to any other team at all, but if we've got 60,000 going to the games and they've got 5,000 going to the games, and if we've got sponsorship of millions and they've got sponsorships of hundreds of thousands of pounds, it is a mismatch. And last Sunday, it was Sunday, wasn't it? Last Sunday going to the game, the first game of the season, you're always dead excited. This is great. You go up, you're there, the flag goes up and all that sort of stuff. And then you have 80-odd% possession. Mm-hmm. You're not going to lose this game, even though I need 3 goals. You're not going to lose this game. And it's such a mismatch. And that's not Kilmarnock's fault. And I don't blame Kilmarnock for playing 10 behind the ball. I don't blame them because that's what it is. But you want to be competitive. You want to be exciting. And it's hard for us to get out of this league. But when we're in this league, I think as a club, we have to show more of things that then we can say, that's why we're a club like no other. Because when all these players talk about coming to Celtic Park in the Champions League, what an atmosphere. Well, that's the fans make that. That's not the club. That's the fans. Mm-hmm. We make that. The fact that they've got hundreds of money, that's the fans. It's us that's paying the money. Mm-hmm. And I always take the Fergus quote about, that I'll be very careful with this money because it's not my money. It's the fans' money. We have got a particularly risk-averse board that's taken that to the extremes. We don't want to spend any of the fans' money. And I'm not saying we should follow what happens across the city, who are really risk takers. We don't want. But there's a middle ground somewhere. So I suppose this is a kind of half rant that spend some money because we've given you to spend it. It's pointless sitting in the back and then paying tax on it, and have a few wee things, initiatives that you can then say, you know what, there you go. That's why we're a club like no other.
By the way, I love that. I love that. So we've got to live the motto, Alan, says Alan.
Walk the walk.
Walk the walk. And I think that you're spot on, Jim. There's none of that I disagree with. And you're right, that the reason we're so cash rich is because of the supporters buying merchandise and season tickets and going to games, spending money in the superstore and everything else. And I think Jim put it perfectly well there, Alan. What's your view on it?
Yeah, so just alluding to a couple of the comments. First one, not so serious, which is I think it's gone off the screen, but I think it was 1888 CFC. Yeah, I like that. It's all clear to me now. The reason that we're hoarding all this money is we're actually going to buy Manchester United. And we'll get a place in the English Premier League because we'll be able to buy Man United. And then I think our old dear Kev the poet, I think said, we are a club like no other because of us. And it comes back to what I was saying at the beginning of the show about the absolute it's like a tropical rainforest of creativity that Celtic supporters generate. And to what extent does the club, tap into that and actually help to promote that and recognise there's a whole ecosystem here of Celtic supporters and creativity and content and talent and all that, that should be harnessed and promoted. But we know, as you say, the board is stale, it's deeply conservative, etc. We do know that. I think, to be sort of coldly rational for a while, it is a PLC. They do have to run it as a business. We are, unfortunately, exactly where George Orwell predicted we would be in 1984, whereby, you control the population through football, alcohol and betting. And here we are. Literally, this is where we are, and we're living. And you just need to look out in the streets of England over the last week to see the sort of dystopian future. So anyway, I'm going down a very bleak rabbit hole here, but back to Celtic. So that genie's out, as it were, in terms of alcohol sponsorship, betting sponsorship. Celtic need to maximise income for the football club, because it gives us giddy, shiny things on the pitch that we all get happy about, etc. That's just the sad realities of it. Should there be counterbalancing activity, which comes back to the more than a club bit of, all right, we acknowledge we've got a betting company on our shirt, we acknowledge we've got an alcohol provider on our shirt. What is the club doing, maybe through the foundation or through other initiatives to promote, alcohol, addiction recovery, betting addiction or recovery, that sort of thing. There should be some kind of joined up thinking around that, recognizing the realities of the marketplace in that respect. Celtic can always do more. I think one of the not unique, but possibly unique in terms of the lens that Celtic supporters look at their club. Most football supporters look at their club And, they demand that they be well run and that they have a football team on the pitch and that they're entertained, etc. And that's fine. I think Celtic supporters have got a longer list of demands than most and are more willing and ready to sort of hold the board to account and be very vociferous through our many channels when those ambitions and those wants aren't met. And that's a healthy thing. That is a healthy thing. There would be nothing worse than being subservient, cap tipping, knee bending sycophants. Who would want a support like that, for example, just to pluck a random example out of the air. So I think Celtic supporters are do have some power in that respect. I just think that power, whilst it is there and it is loud, the corporate structure of Celtic doesn't allow for it to really permeate into the boardroom at Celtic because of the nature of how the club's controlled. We have a single billionaire owner, essentially, it's what in effective terms, that can essentially staff the boardroom with who he likes and silence any criticism or and so forth. So that's the reality of the world as we find it, unfortunately. So I agree with the sentiments of all Jim has said. I think the real world realities are we have to live with some of that, but could we do a lot more? Yes, we absolutely could.
Yeah, I love the balance there, Alan. And it takes me back actually to a story that Martin O'Neill told at one of our live events. Jim will have remembered this. When we always think about the 6-2 game and the chip and all that, brilliant, superb result. That was the first Glasgow derby of Martin O'Neill's Celtic career. But they beat us 5-1 at Ibrox that season. And Martin O'Neill speaks about Dermot Desmond after the game coming into the dressing room. And I remember saying to Martin, were you happy with that? Because what's he doing there? He's nothing to do with the football operation, surely. So that gives you
the food orders.
Yeah, he's taking the grub orders, yes. It gives you a sense that level of interference rather than involvement. I would use the word interference. Martin Clark. Jim Orr, the thinking man supporter, talks a lot of sense. There you go, Jim. You can go home happy in the knowledge that you talk a lot of sense.
Thanks, Dad.
Yeah, there we go. Brian Harkin, why can't we be a little bit more ambitious? This is what we're asking about for, Brian. The ambition. You need to have that ambition. And the fans' ambition is huge. And it's being tempered by basically a wall of silence. And Fraser Smith comes in. Is the hotel idea dead then? This is interesting. I got an email yesterday about this from another Celtic supporter who tunes in on a regular basis, who said, I hear some of your guests asking about the Celtic Hotel Museum, etc. Planning was granted back in 2018-19 with an estimated cost of £18 million. However, the project was scrapped back in 2022. I don't know why they scrapped it, but according to the planning website, the plans said cancelled. The Barrowfield project has an estimated cost of £21 million. When you put this up against the Tory Glen project, £19 million, and Ravenscraig football project, £23 million, it's the same ballpark cost. So there's the update. It seems to be dead. And again, it comes down to engagement. We don't know, Jim, because nobody tells us, do they?
No, I thought the Celtic Museum was a good idea. Why wouldn't you want to do that? I kind of don't want to keep repeating the same things. I think we need to push it. Because we've got the money that we've got, it's fairly low risk to do some of the things that we could do. And the last point I would make on this, because I'll just repeat myself, is the fact that the Champions League thing there, you qualify for Champions League, you'll make loads of money. And the club will think, this is great, we're making loads of money. But it's our money we're giving you.
Yeah.
So if you want to charge £200 for a Champions League package and you'll get, what's that, they got £12 million. I'll charge us 100 and you'll get £6 million. They'll look at that as a £6 million loss. Mm-hmm. When in fact, what they should be doing is saying, we're just happy your supporters are giving us £6 million. That's not how they're looking at it. And I take all the points on board that Alan said. There's a PLC, let's maximise the revenue. But you have to read the room sometimes. And we had a terrible transfer last year. Both windows were poor. This one's shaping up to be a poor one as well. We managed to go over the line just last year because what I said at the time was that should we have lost the league last year? I think that's up there with all the things that Kelly and the Whites have ever done to have that much money and to blow the league. And then you can double that this season, given the money that we've got if we don't win the league. And as I said, I shall give a comment on the 2nd of September as to how I think the season might go. I'm not going to get too giddy about last weekend, because I think that the points they dropped at Tynecastle, understandable, first game of the season, Hearts were up for it. I think they'll hammer Motherwell tomorrow by quite a few goals, and then we go Easter Road, which I found tricky. So I'm not getting too giddy about the start that we've made. So I think if we don't get these transfer windows right, I think we're making life so much more difficult for ourselves this season. Another few injuries, and I think we'll end up with the same type of title race we had last season. And it shouldn't be that. It really shouldn't be that.
No, I've got to say thank you everybody for tuning in. It really is appreciated. And just this morning, we smashed through the 17 million view barrier on YouTube. To give you some kind of perspective on what that means, the only other channel that is dedicated to Celtic who has done that kind of figure is Celtic themselves. So Acsom is in pretty good company there. Thank you all for tuning in, because like Jim was saying there about the money in the bank, their views were all done by the people that are tuning in. So thank you very much. We are going to be in Gracie's next month. The reason I say this, you might have seen a young lad over in Ireland in a boozer singing The Dying Rebel. It went viral. He's unbelievable. He's 16 and his name is Paddy Mullane, right? Well, he's actually joined Charlie Mulgrew. They won't be on the stage at the same time. Charlie's not giving him back. He's joined the Charlie Mulgrew gig at Gracie's, and I announced it just the other day. Lovely fella. It'll be the first time he's ever played live in Scotland, and it's going to be at an Acsom night with Charlie Mulgrew. There are some tickets, and I'm not just saying this, the tickets are flying because it's a good bill, but obviously I think a lot of people are interested in seeing the young guy performing as well. The ticket link is underneath the video today, but it looks as though that's going to be a sellout probably within the next 7 days or so. So if you want to come along and see Charlie Mulgrew, who is excellent, I've got to say, alongside Paddy Mullane, who seems to me to be an emerging talent. And I think we've got him at the right time, because there comes a point where you just can't get through the agents to get these guys. Thankfully, we've got them early doors. The link is under the video. Thanks, everybody, for getting involved. I have been, for me, today, I've been a sponge listening to guys like Alan Morrison and Jim Warren. I hope you have too. Join us again over the weekend, half an hour before kickoff. We'll be covering the Hibs game. Thank you all for joining us on a Celtic State of Mind.